Hey, we're live, everybody. It's Friday. It is what month is it? It is still September.
September.
What a month, let me tell you.
Yeah, I have no idea. I barely know what day it is. It's Friday. It's hotline time. That's what time it is for everybody. We do this every week. It's live on YouTube and on LinkedIn. Sorry about the little scheduling snafu. Did you know that time zones exist, everybody?
Real thing. It's a real thing.
Who would have thought? You can go to CUIHotline.org and you can fill out the form. You can call the number and you can leave your question over there. You can put your questions in chat and then we'll get to them. We got a huge queue of questions from previous hotlines and from the webinar that we just did a couple days ago, which was awesome. We had hundreds and hundreds of people checking out our deep dive onto the 48 CFR rule. So lots and lots of questions came out of that. But first, like always, as we get started, Scott's here. Scott, you have been, like always, traveling around everywhere, getting a feel for what's going on, going to all the conferences, status on all the airlines.
Yeah.
What are you seeing and hearing out there?
It's been an interesting couple of weeks. You know, the week that 48 CFR dropped, we were at Billington, right? So Billington, if you don't know, is a security conference, federally focused security conference in DC, heavily attended by federal employees from all agencies, all kinds of agencies there. Not a lot of contractors. There's a few, especially some of the larger primes, but mostly Fed contractors and not only DoD. So Katie and Stacy, I did a panel there. Stacy Bostjanek was on the panel along with Mark Montgomery and some others. John Garza from DoD had a great panel. But then the next day, Katie had a keynote and was able to talk about, hey, finally we've got this 48 CFR thing out. And the response was really interesting. It was almost like the rest of the audience didn't know what she was talking about. And I was really kind of perplexed by it. It was almost like all of the other feds outside the DoD space just really did not understand what it was. There just wasn't a lot of, uptake, if you will, that of the complexity or the importance or anything else about, what Katie was up there, obviously very excited talking about. And so I found that really interesting. That being said, Katie did say that they're talking to other agencies, FAA, and some others that are very interested in leveraging the CMMC framework and such. But I was just a little bit taken back by the lack of knowledge in the audience about the requirement set.
Interesting.
The other thing that I found really interesting at that conference was on the panel. I asked a question about the FAR CUI rule, and Mark Montgomery, who was one of the authors on the Solarium Commission report, along with Bob Metzger and others, probably the most aggressive I've ever heard somebody get on stage about the lack of attention that security is getting from agencies not called DoD.
Wow.
And he specifically called out Department of Education and Department of Agriculture as not taking security seriously. And he did it from the stage in front of all of these feds, which you don't see that happen very often.
I love Mark Montgomery. I love that guy.
Yeah. So you just don't see that very often. So that, I guess that's a takeaway for me. And then, then the next week I was down at an MSP conference in Orlando. Got to catch up with Andrew Morgan down there, and others. That went really well. Good conversations and such. But interestingly, the expo hall is there, and as we see in all kinds of MSP, MSP ecosystem conversations, they pretty much don't know what's going on with CMMC and cyber at all. And you ask them about FedRAMP and they look at you like you have three heads and all those kinds of things. So it's just kind of more of the same from the MSP tool community, when it comes to helping out our MSPs that are supporting this ecosystem. So
Fun
Anyway,
story.
those are a couple takeaways from me.
Fun story about Mark Montgomery. If nobody's ever heard Mark Montgomery talk about stuff, he's obviously very to the point, which I appreciate. I was attached to his staff at my last duty station when I was deployed on the USS George Washington. I was just a rider, right? I was just attached to the staff. I wasn't part of ship's company or anything. Best orders you can get in the Navy are attached to the admiral's staff. You show up the day before the ship leaves. You don't have to do anything. I was just doing cyber assessments. I highly doubt he remembers me, but I did an in brief with him. And, he's the commander of the entire forward deployed carrier strike group. And he was like, do you know what our job is here? And I was like, no. And he was like, I was like, I know what my job is. And he was like, our entire purpose out here is to be a giant middle finger to Russia and China. He was like, we float around, and if they're doing military exercises, we drive right through the middle of them and basically just throw up middle fingers the entire time. At one point in time, there was a super typhoon headed up towards Korea, and we instead of taking the most direct line through to Korea so everybody could get in before the sea state got out of control, we drove right through a Chinese military exercise. So everybody on the smaller ships was like rocking and rolling on the front end of this super typhoon. But yeah, it was fun. It was a good time. Anyways, that's my Mark Montgomery story. He's been like that, I assume, forever. But I love that guy.
Well, maybe Mark had something to him. Elizabeth just posted here, as a former public school teacher, I can tell you that security, especially data handling, is not even taught to teachers or most staff. So maybe he's not that far off with the DOE stuff.
I mean, most school teachers have to pay for their own crayons and markers. They're definitely not getting training on MFA or basic cybersecurity. So yeah, that one's a tough one. All right, Daniel. How about that Boeing memo? Huh?
How about that Boeing memo? Yeah, it kind of snuck on into the mailbox. So I somehow, through some mysterious means, ended up on some kind of subscription to the supply chain newsletter from Boeing. I posted about it this week on LinkedIn. I'll drop the post here in chat. But it's very interesting. So Boeing, just general cyber updates in this little newsletter. And then about halfway down, they say CMMC L2 certifications. And the first two words, act now. And it's like, we should probably maybe do something about this, right? And it caused quite a stir, so much so that a construction company, who I didn't even think would have even been aware of this, reached out to me a day after and said, hey, you heard about this Boeing memo that said we need to get CMMC certified? I was like, yeah. I actually posted about it yesterday. And I was like, Boeing is like just kind of softly, and I think Lockheed's kind of doing the same thing. I feel like just kind of softly like, hey guys, we haven't formally said do it yet, but do it. It's like we're kind of teasing it a little bit. For those that are listening and paying attention, they'll be able to kind of catch on pretty quickly. But I'm still waiting for that Lockheed memo to drop.
I just checked, still not up there. I think now at this point, they're going to put out a memo on November 10th to basically be like, hey, you remember those other half dozen memos that we put out over the last 18 months that told you implement 171 and be ready for an assessment? Call us when you have your assessment.
But the interesting thing that I thought about that Boeing memo, obviously they're saying go do it, but they were pretty specific about it. They weren't, they specifically said level 2 C3PAO assessment.
Yep.
They didn't say self-assessment. It was level 2 C3PAO assessment, and they were very specific about it. And it wasn't qualified at all. It was just go do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reminder to suppliers, FCI and CUI, with the specified CMMC certification to secure contract awards. And then right below it, act now, start preparing for and obtaining certification through a certified third-party assessor organization, C3PAO. For any questions, click the link or reach out to Brett Cox, who we also had on a podcast here as well. So yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. Like, if your prime is sending these emails and they have not directly communicated to you the importance of you being critical to their supply chain, you're probably not as important as you think you are, meaning you now have to position yourself to show Boeing, in this case, how important you actually are by having this certification, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And get added to the list. You need to get added to the list. So
I was just talking to a Northrop Grumman program manager the other day, who's in charge of a huge program that they're working on. And they just recently started talking to the supply chain side of the house about reaching out to critical suppliers to make sure that they're insulated. They're actually going to be extending Northrop Grumman enclaves and solutions to their critical suppliers. And I was like, ballpark, how many companies are you talking about? And they were like, I don't know, like a dozen, maybe a couple dozen. And I was like, not hundreds, not thousands. And he was like, what? I was like, well, what about, everybody? And he was like, well, we're helping the ones that we need. And I was like, but what about everybody else? And it was just not computing in the brain of like, I was like, but what about the rest of the supply chain? And
the tens of thousands of.
He was like, we're helping the supply chain for this program. What are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, it's just another anecdote. Obviously, we don't have a citation. It's just another anecdote, but there's going to be a lot of people left high and dry.
I had a very similar conversation with an executive from, I'm not going to name the prime, but a top 3 prime, maybe top 2, maybe top 1 prime, could be.
Lockheed Martin.
Could be. Yeah, maybe.
But he basically told me that their entire supply chain was CMMC L2 certified.
What? That they already were, or that they needed to be?
We sent out the surveys.
Yeah. So
okay. We'll just leave it at that.
We'll just leave it at that. And so there's like I said, there's still a lot of misunderstanding and confusion in the ecosystem about the whole program, about all of it.
Yeah. Well, we're about to find out pretty soon. What are we, 46 days away? Something like that from the start of the phase rollout.
So. Scott's head right there.
Yeah.
The days and the minutes and the seconds.
Good.
Absolutely. Anybody read 3 body problem? They just need to project
a countdown.
Inside of everybody.
Countdown right here.
Yeah.
Right here.
All right. Well, speaking of not understanding your contractual obligations and the potential consequences, 2 things. One, I just reposted this morning, so you can check it out on my LinkedIn page, a webinar that Jim Dempsey and Stephanie Sigmund did together. We've had both of these people on podcasts, CS2, ton of content with them over the past. They're 2 of my favorite people. They did a whole webinar for the IAPP organization, which is, it's like a certification organization for attorneys around technology, cybersecurity, and stuff like that, talking all about the False Claims Act, how it affects defense contractors, the DoD's Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative, CMMC, so on and so forth. It's about an hour, so definitely check that out. It's definitely worth your time if you're not familiar with it. But in parallel to that, a couple days ago, a little birdie, this is obviously just an anecdote, so take it with a grain of salt, but a little birdie told me that starting in January, like most things, when the administration changed, stuff got reorganized, stuff got restaffed. It's just what happens whenever there's an election, right? The Cyber Civil Fraud Initiative did not get dismantled, did not get axed, did not get put on ice, did not do any of that. Apparently, they doubled down on all of it. And I was told to expect dozens or more of very large settlements under the Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative in the next 12 to 18 months. Apparently, the handful of ones that we saw so far this year, I think it was Aero Turbine and Morse and things like that, were leftovers that had been started before, and those cases were still continued even after staffing changed in the civil division, the fraud division of the Department of Justice. So they are absolutely still going after it. The stat that Stephanie said on the webinar with Jim was False Claims Act, Cyber False Claims Act settlements in the first 6 months of this administration are more than all of the Cyber Civil Fraud Initiative False Claims Act settlements for cybersecurity in the entire previous administration. So I have to go back and add up the math, but that's when they're sort of in neutral going after what's going on. So I expect that we're going to see a humongous increase over the next 12 to 18 months. So be on the lookout for that, everybody.
Hey, who needs tariffs when you have the Cyber Fraud Initiative out there? I'm just putting that out there.
The False Claims Act is billions of dollars in
revenue. Is that what it would be?
Well, I guess you could call it revenue because they, it's penalties for work that didn't get done, but it's money coming in the door in terms of billions of dollars. So, but they're sticking with it for sure. And I expect we're going to have to do a lot of podcasts because there's going to be a lot of these settlements that come out. So, there you go. Last point on there from the webinar, they talk all about the legal precedent that the Aerojet Rocketdyne case said. Cybersecurity clauses in your contracts are material to the contract. So they use the example of like, there's a contract clause out there that says that contractors have to recycle paper, right? If you don't recycle your paper, nobody's going to false claims act you because it's not really material. Cybersecurity absolutely is. And so you've had this clause in the contract all along. And now there's all these systems of proving that it's up there and you're making official attestations. It's an awesome video. Definitely check it out. There you go. All righty. Let's see. Steven had an awesome question. In maintaining CMMC once it is accomplished, is it possible for small businesses with very minimal IT staff to maintain this compliance, or is it better to partner with an MSSP or MSP?
So that's kind of hard to answer. So if you're let's say 100-person company, I mean, I don't know the exact size, Steven, 50 to 100, maybe something like that. Once the implementation is done, we have to figure out, okay, what are the ongoing maintenance and IR and security requirements, right? So we're talking about things like patch management, right? Real basic, but has to be done. We're talking about incident response, reviewing logs, change control approvals, updates to SSP, POAM, policies, procedures. You know, when you start kind of going down the list of things and tacking that on to what your probably current daily activities are, it could be very much burdensome. You could need maybe another quarter, half, maybe even another full FTE, again, kind of depending on that 50 to 100 user size. And if you have any other core, like any other simultaneous larger projects going on above and beyond that. So I would say it's definitely possible. I would say for the care and feeding, it's probably easier to outsource that to allow you to focus on bigger and better kind of projects and scopes of what you have going on in the business. But yeah, I would say it's possible, but I would say you probably need to add maybe a half FTE at a minimum.
Right. My concern with the question itself is if you're going to leverage an MSP or MSSP, you definitely need to implement that support mechanism before you do your CMMC certification.
Good question.
You do not want to go get certified and then try and go hand the keys over to an MSP, MSSP, because they're going to want to implement likely new software, new, all kinds of new processes, their tech stack, and that is going to significantly change your, your processes, which means that you're going to need to get recertified. Yeah. So you certainly don't want to go get certified and then go to an MSP. You want to integrate that MSP into your certification process.
Yep. That's a good call out, because that significant boundary change is very real and when switching managed service providers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, your scope's definitely going to change if you, go from like, we did this thing on a shoestring in-house and then we bring in an external provider to do a bunch of stuff. Like it's definitely you're going to change some stuff for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, teed it up there for us, but, I know an MSP. So,
I know.
If you need help, speaking
of softball questions, how much does it cost?
Oh, you always ask this question, and I fall for it every time. The MMC is just the assessment cost, as Jacob would say. The cost of implementing is called under DFAR 7012, our long outstanding friend. But if you've not done either, you're probably looking between 100 to 250,000, kind of depending on your small business size, and then another 40 to 60 to 70,000 every 3 years for your certification, somewhere in that realm. If you do an enclave, it could be smaller, it could be cheaper, depending on if it's a physical enclave or virtual desktops, and kind of that whole mix. There's so much scoping that has to take place to really dial it in, but that's a good ballpark.
Yeah, and so, to plug the session that we did to secure the DIBs ago, I did a presentation specifically about how to budget for CMMC. So go find that video. Maybe somebody can grab it and drop it in the comments here.
Yeah, I'm grabbing it here.
But that session specifically goes through how to create that budgeting process, not only for IT but for CMMC specifically. And then this year in Secure the DIB, I did an update to that referenced some of the content from that session as well. So two good sessions that really does a pretty good dive, I think, down into the CMMC cost and what kind of budget you need to put together for IT security and compliance. So,
yeah, and remember, when it comes to the cost of complying with 7012 versus the cost of CMMC assessment, like Daniel said, that's just to be accurate, right? However, if you don't believe Scott or Daniel around the six-figure, like this is a six-figure problem around complying with DFAR 7012, remember, the government had never estimated the cost of implementing NIST SP 800-171 or complying with DFAR 7012. They should have, but through the wild and wacky world of rulemaking, they didn't estimate the implementation cost in 2013 when they prescribed 853 controls. And then when they revised DFAR 7012 in an emergency in 2016, they basically said, well, this is less work than what you did in 2013, and this is an emergency, so we're not going to estimate it. It's less work. So congratulations, people who are new, you're going to have stuff to do. That was basically where they left it. When the CMMC rule came out in 2020 for 1.0, they didn't estimate the cost of 800-171 because it's not making you implement 800-171. It's just assessing the cost of 171. And now that we've got 2.0, it's not estimated any of those rules either. But back in January, we got the proposed FAR CUI rule, and that estimated the cost of implementation for 800-171 generally because it hasn't been a requirement in a contract for non-defense contractors. And so if you check out, you can just Google FAR CUI rule, Federal Register, and then you can check it out. But I think they said total estimated labor cost for a small business in the initial year, $148,200. Recurring annual labor cost of $98,800. They were kind of right in line with what we see in terms of implementation and maintenance costs around 171 implementation. So you don't have to take it from us.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob, but I believe that the hourly rates that they were using to determine those labor costs were also unreasonably
$95.
low. Yeah.
$95 an hour. So, hey, if you can find somebody for $95 an hour that can do all of 800-171 implementation and walk you through, you have won the lottery. Also, if you're a person getting paid $95 an hour and you can do all that work, call us because we'd love to hire you and pay you more.
So for the one time, if we were to up that rate to $150 an hour, it's $234,000. It's a little over 1,500 hours.
Yeah.
And then the run and maintain, I'm just going to do the math because I'm just curious, would be 156,000 versus 100. Yeah. So yeah, it's significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Jody says, after initial certification, what is your take on approach when engaging in M&A activity, specifically due diligence and recertification process? Key focus area or gotchas? I know you guys have thoughts on this. Just to reiterate, I posted the link a little earlier, Jody, to the webinar that I posted on LinkedIn from the IAPP webinar on the False Claims Act. There was a section in there that was very interesting from Stephanie. Apparently, and I don't have the details on this, you'd have to reach out to Stephanie or look this up. Apparently, there's something around a safe harbor provision going on where if you have acquired a company and you found out that they have cyber non-compliance issues and you self-report, they will give you time to fix the problem under the False Claims Act. If you don't self-report and then something goes wrong, then all bets are off. It's an interesting detail that I hadn't heard. I was watching this on a plane last night at like 11 o'clock at night. So I have to go back and get the details, but definitely check out that webinar for more information on that detail. Daniel, you guys talk about this all the time.
Yeah, so on the M&A side, and Daniel, I know you have lots of thoughts on this as well. But it all depends on what your strategy is going to be for how to integrate them as part of an acquisition. Are you going to leave that organization essentially running in and of itself? Or are you going to migrate them into the acquiring organization's infrastructure, keeping the scope the same? But one of the challenges, regardless of which way you go, if you decide to migrate in and don't change your scope boundary or anything like that, you still are going to end up adding cage codes, right, to the acquiring company's certification. And because, the DoD's take on that is that requires a recertification as well. So either way, really, you're going to end, unless you just leave the company alone and don't do anything to it, you're going to have to do a recertification of some kind in almost all cases, unless you just leave it completely standalone. What do you what do you think? Thoughts, Daniel?
Yeah, because I mean that is the tricky part. I mean, you talked about basically when the handshake is done and legally that entity no longer exists, right? Well, it kind of evaporates, right? I mean, that boundary and registered in EMAS, that CMMC UID isn't associated. You have to reassociate. I mean, you have to go through that recertification process.
Well, that's what I was saying about the entity, though. If you leave it as a wholly owned subsidiary type situation, right, and so the legal entity doesn't change, then the certification is still valid. But if that legal entity changes, that means the cage code changes. Now you've got a recertification situation,
which is going to be a little tricky because if you're mid contract, let's say you're year 2 of a 3-year contract. Well, what happens? The CMMC UID that you submitted and you were attesting to no longer exists, right? I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of paperwork kind of reassociate what that is. I was on a conversation a few weeks ago with an organization that bought another. So for this example, we'll say it's 1,000-person company and they bought a 100-person company, right? And this 100-person company had not done any CMMC things. They were not certified. And the 1,000-person company is like, okay, we're going to integrate them in. And I was like, okay, well, how long is it going to take to integrate them in? They're like, it'll take about 6 to 12 months. I said, okay. In the new world order of November 10th, if a requirement comes out on a solicitation for certification, they won't be able to bid work until your integration's done and reassess with their cage code added to your certification boundary. And I was like, you could easily lose a few months worth of work being able to actually be awarded work because of your delay in integration of 6 to 12 months, which is not uncommon for a large company to take about 6 months to integrate on a minimum. And so that's kind of the tension here is like, if you buy a company that already is CMMC certified, leave them alone until you have a very fast integration plan planned and kind of a lull in any potential award scenarios. But if you're buying somebody that's not CMMC certified, you're going to have a little bit of the same problem, except now it's immediately how fast can I get them integrated into our CMMC certification boundary and our UID associated with, their cage code associated with that. Because again, in that lurch, you're not going to be able to be awarded work if you can't report what that boundary is. So there's going to be the M&A space is going to get very complex very quickly. And I think no matter which direction you're looking at, there could be a window of time. Unless, to Scott's point, you just completely leave them alone to their boundary that they're already certified to, there's going to be a little bit of time where you have to assume some risk of not being able to be awarded defense work until all of that's sorted out. I mean, just the backlog to get assessed is going to be potentially multiple months at that time to get a cage code added.
Yeah, I would say if you have a C3PAO that you've worked with, I would develop a very close relationship with that C3PAO and see if I can, especially if you're a very acquisitive company, if you're acquiring a lot of organizations, there may be a situation where you're having to do a delta assessment to add cage codes, to migrate, in from M&A, whatever it is, where you're having to do delta assessments on a pretty regular basis. I would have that C3PAO on lockdown for fast delta assessments.
Assessor as a service.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real thing, and it's going to be needed.
It is. It's a very good model to have, honestly.
Let's see here. So question that we get a lot that's been in the queue for a while is, when should I start CMMC? And Scott had a good question in here. He said, should companies be thinking that they need to be prepared to be fully implemented by November 10th in SPRS under the CMMC self-attestation tab? So I hate to say it depends, right? But it depends, because November 10th is the time period when contracting officers will begin inserting the 7021 clause and filling in the blank as applicable for new solicitations and contracts. So your metric the one that I've been telling people for a long time, which I think is the most helpful big picture idea, is when are you expecting an award to go out for bids, and then work backwards from there, right? So if you're expecting an award to come out in like mid to late November that you want to submit a bid on, and then you know that it's going to get awarded in like 3 months, then you need to know what your status is going to be when it's going to be awarded, and then work backwards from there, right? So if you think, okay, we're not bidding on any new work for 12 months, and then that solicitation's coming out in 12 months and it won't be awarded for 3 months after that, you have 15 months to go from where you are now to certified in order to take award of that contract. If you're planning on bidding something in January and it's going to get awarded in February, you've got way less time than what's going on, which was really the main takeaway, from the webinar this week was, if you wait until you see the requirement in the solicitation, it's probably too late, especially if you're doing level 2 stuff.
Well, I agree with exactly what you're saying, Jacob. I would caveat one thing on it, though. If you already have existing contracts that have option years or task orders coming out, those option years or task orders could very easily have a requirement attached to them. And you need to be ready for that. So, other than that, if you're talking about brand new work and you don't have any existing work, if you're looking at brand new work, then I agree with you.
So one thing I want to add as a caveat to all this, because we keep getting this question a lot. What's the minimal viable I can do to be awarded work post November 10th for CMMC level 2? Can I self-attest? And if so, what's the lowest score I can put in? And the lowest score being 88 out of 110. But here's a gotcha, talking about false claims a minute ago. There's only certain controls and points. You can't use 5 and 3 point controls. You can only use certain 1 point controls. So what that means is you can have an 88 out of 110 for a conditional and then have to remediate within 6 months. But if you're not representing the correct points you got to get to 88, you've now misrepresented yourself to the DoD on your actual conditional status. You are actually not conditional because you calculated it with the wrong points that weren't valid, right? So look at 32 CFR, look at the CMMC assessment process on the Cyber AB. Because I agree with Scott and Jacob in the sense of, you're going to want to submit something for new work to be awarded post November 10th. The question is, if it's a self-attesting, especially at level 2, making sure you're self-attesting correctly. And to back up one more, if I'm a contracting officer and I see an 88 score and I see a 110 score and they're both self-attest, I'm going to pick the higher of the 2 scores. So I don't think conditional is actually going to be that viable of an option from a competitive advantage perspective, because I think there's going to be people in there self-attesting to a perfect 110. And at that point, if you're an 88 and you feel accurate about your 88, you honestly could have grounds to protest. Because I can't tell you how many.
There's going to be so
no. There's not going to be any protests over this.
It's going to be an
it should have been going on for the past 5 years, 7 years.
If they actually, in the next year, when they are supposedly going to use the self-attested status for contract award, if every single one of, DOD is going to be upset that I say this, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make life harder for you, DOD, but if every single self-attested award is not protested, there's a lawyer out there not doing their job.
Yep.
100%. Absolutely.
Every single contract is going to get protested.
Yep.
Well, on that cheery note, for people who want to know how to reverse engineer your implementation and certification timeline, you can look up the long-range acquisition forecasts for the customers that you work for or the customers that your primes work for. And then you can go to like Nav Air has a good one, for example. All of the various components you can hunt around and usually find these. They're industry days. That's really what the industry day conferences are just them walking through their spreadsheets. So if you click on the Nav Air one and you go to their long range acquisition forecast, this is for FY25. The FY26 ones are going to come out. You can look at the list of everything that they're planning to have out there for contracts. And then you can see over here the types of work that they're going to be putting out for solicitation. And then part of the long range acquisition forecast is them anticipating when the solicitation is going to go out and then when they're going to award the contract. So if this had a CMMC level 2 C3 PAO status requirement as a condition of award, you would see in quarter 2 that there is a CMMC level 2 C3 PAO condition of status of award, and you need to have that status by Q3 of the same fiscal year in order to take award. So a lot of these are like 2 quarters at the most that you would have as a heads up on the solicitation. So that can help you reverse engineer if the type of work that you're bidding on has a very long lead time. But a lot of these, as you scroll through this, this spreadsheet, they're like the same quarter or maybe 2 quarters in some situations. So it helps, but it's not a foolproof way of doing it. It's just another warning of saying, if you wait until you see the solicitation to get started on 171 at all, you're just not going to have the time.
You're just not going to win the work.
You
have to understand you just won't win it. And there's a couple comments in chat here. Like, I would question a perfect score actually versus a 104 score. Absolutely. Yeah. Like 100%. The 110, when we talked to John Ellis at DibCAC back 2, 3, 4 years ago at this point, I mean, he was saying that, 80-ish% of the scores submitted were perfect scores, but they only had like a successful pass rate of their DibCAC high assessments at like, 10% or 15, some crazy low number. And so
my best friend in high school and I figured this out in freshman biology class. It was the only A he got in high school because I used to slide my Scantron under the test divider with the answers on it, and he would purposely mark a couple of them different from what I got so he wouldn't get a perfect score, because everybody knew you didn't read the book, Zach. Everybody knows you're not getting 100 on this test. He knew freshman year you don't put down a perfect score on the Scantron. It's suspicious unless you want to get asked questions, and he never got asked because he'd be like, I'm marking a couple of these wrong. You got an A. You got an A. Only A he ever got. Love that guy.
Love that guy. Shout out.
I mean, back to what she was saying, or Lamera, what they were saying. If they put these contracts out with self-attest requirement for level 2, and a company gets a 104, gets awarded a contract, but I have a C3 PAO 110, I'm going to protest that win.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? I mean, everybody is. Or if somebody gets 110 and I have 107 and I don't believe they're 110, I'm going to protest the award.
Yep.
I mean, it's just the self-attesting contract is going to be it's going to be really ugly, I'm afraid.
I think it is.
Well, thankfully, not a lot of people should see a level 2 self-assessment requirement, because I just don't think there's going to be a lot of those that go out there. But yeah, your point is valid, Scott. I really don't think there's going to be a lot of those that are going on out there. I think it's just, especially for subs on the other side of the primes, I just don't see it. So.
Yeah. By the way, for those that are unaware, that's the DoD's estimate percentage-wise of how many people will be able to self-attest.
Yep. This is from the final rule that came out. The table of contents is your friends. If you want to scroll down to this, scroll down to the Regulatory Flexibility Act section 6, and then if you scroll down here, it'll give you the percentage estimates of what they think are going to be the number of affected entities. Fun fact, the DoD has no idea what the exact numbers are. They never have, they never will. There's various reasons why they can't see into the supply chain. They don't track people who bid on stuff but don't get awarded. They don't track COTS awards, so they don't know what that percentage is. They don't track subcontractors past tier 1, and even then they can only see some of them. They also don't track who gets CUI or when. So the only thing that I think is roughly accurate would be the general percentage breakdown here of which level they're going to get. But again, that's only at the prime level. That's not at the subcontractor level. You're just not statistically likely to see level 2 self-assessment requirements very often. So maybe the protest won't be as frequent, Scott.
Yeah, well, Terry's out here with some new service offering ideas.
Somebody should offer some not quite.
There you go, Jacob. We found it.
There you go. There you go.
Shredding, CUI shredding food truck idea.
There you go.
Cheat sheets for self-assessment.
Just one of the many life lessons I learned in freshman biology. You know what I'm saying, everybody? All righty. Let's see. In the last Sum It Up podcast, great show. Thanks for checking it out, Dark Green. Like and subscribe, everybody. I learned that a company only needs to convince the program manager type person to assign you level 2 self-assessment, and then you're golden. Is that the right takeaway? I mean, yeah. If you're friends with the program manager and you're like, hey, this is level 2 self-assessment, right? And they tell the contracting officer, hey, fill in the blank on DFAR 7025 and 7021 that says level 2 self-assessment, then you're golden. However, you probably don't know who the PM is. If you call them, they probably won't answer. And you probably don't have a lobbying budget like the Lockheeds and the Northrops and the Raytheons of the world to sweeten the deal for what you want your status to be. So that is a way to do it. Good luck if that's what you're trying to do. It's just probably not a high percentage play, if you know what I'm saying. So, and
you probably guarantee that it's going to be in protest for 9 months. So
yeah, absolutely.
That little thing.
Let's see here. Zero Logic says the fact that not all 1 pointers are poemable and select 3 or 5 pointers can be is definitely going to trip some people up. Yeah. So, FIPS validated cryptography is a kind of like, this is not a poemable item because it's not a 1 point item, but it also is a poemable item because there's a caveat. And 1 point items can be on the poem, except for some 1 point items that can't. Like I say, it is true that poems exist as a characteristic of CMMC 2.0 compared to 1.0, but it's not what people are used to thinking of a poem as. Anything we don't have implemented just goes on a remediation plan, and we will find out what is implemented or not as a result of an assessment. Like the traditional approach to poems, they have preloaded what they would. So for instance, in the traditional ATO risk management framework 853 world, they come up with what they want as their requirements baseline for the set of controls that have to be implemented for a satellite ground control system. The implementer goes through and implements all the controls, and then a security control assessor comes in afterwards and runs through the verification assessment saying, did you actually implement all these controls? The security assessment report with the system security plan gets put together and sent up in this authorization package, and somebody reads them and makes the decision, is this an acceptable risk for the controls that weren't implemented based off what the plan was, right? That's the rough idea of what's going on. So different programs can have different things unimplemented and still get their authorization because a risk decision was made by somebody who is in charge of making a risk decision. We can't do that in this situation because you can't, well, one, these are non-federal systems, so nobody's making this decision in real time over what's tolerable and what's not. It also doesn't scale. So they've front-loaded that risk decision, and they've said, none of these controls, and none of these type of controls can be on a POAM, period. The rest of them, doesn't matter what they are, as long as this set of 1 point controls, you can have them on a POAM, you get 6 months to remediate them. So you can have a POAM, but they're not going to do a case-by-case POAM for you. So it's just not going to happen. Let's see here. For some folks here, trying to figure all this out by yourself is like trying to represent yourself in a court when you are not a lawyer. Yeah.
Amen.
I think it's a good metaphor. We were talking about this before our webinar this week, where I'm like, we have, in my opinion, as somebody whose job it is to try to explain all of this stuff as efficiently as possible, I've been saying for a while now that if you're starting from zero and you're trying to fill in everything that you need to know about all the DFARS clauses, DFARS provisions, NIST controls, how they work, POAM, scoping, all that stuff, and you need to get it done in 3 months, it ain't happening. It's too much information, right? I mean, but this is also not unusual in any other type of field. It's like, this is what accountants do. You don't have the time to understand the tax code in terms of what's going on. This is what lawyers do. This is what general contractors do in terms of understanding building codes. I mean, it is a professional realm of things that you need to know. There's, at this point, it is very, very difficult to explain everything at a high level in a single 45-minute webinar. Trust us, we try regularly.
Yeah.
The night before our webinar this week, I was telling you, Scott, I was just there like delete. Like we just don't have time to get through all of this stuff. We barely had time to get to the questions. And it was just like, well, we don't have time to explain that. We don't have time to explain that. Obviously, we'll get better over time at wrapping this all together. But I just had a pre-call with somebody that we're doing an event with in October. And they were like, hey, we'd love for you to kick off our event and explain the history of how we got here, in terms of like how it started, where it went, what everything with 1.0 was, why it took so long, all the rulemaking stuff, what's going on with. They wanted the whole story, and I was like, okay, cool. Like,
got a week,
and they said you got 30 minutes, and I was like, well, do you want Q&A with that? So so it's just
well, that's why I love the fact that we have all of the video content that we have, because these are all valid questions that people are asking for the first time, that we literally have been answering and talking about for the last 6, 7, 8 years in some cases. And we can just drop a link and say, okay, you can go educate yourself with this content. It hasn't really changed that much, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's why the video content we've got out there is so important, in my opinion. Yeah,
absolutely. All righty. Are SSL VPN connections CMMC compliant?
Yeah, so we had this question on the webinar this week. Yes and no. So as long as your SSL cert supports the encryption mechanism that the back end of it is using FIPS 140-2. So like TLS 1.2, we talk about this a lot with connecting the Microsoft tenants. As long as you're using the right cryptography, absolutely, it's compliant. But you have to make sure you're using the right cryptography. And split tunneling, no go. They address split tunneling in Rev 3 of NIST 171, which is not part of CMMC. It's not been revved into that. So split tunneling is still a no-no when it comes to NIST 171 Rev 2, which is CMMC level 2.
Wait for CMMC 3.0.
That's right.
There you go.
Latest and greatest.
Let's see here. Do mobile devices that make wireless connections but do not process any CUI and do not have access to file shares, are those devices subject to MDM solutions?
So we had this question on the webinar as well, and I like how we're overflowing the questions we didn't get to as well. So I hope these people are watching us. If your device does not process, store, or transmit CUI, it's just out of scope. You don't have to put MDM on it. You just follow whatever your corporate policies are. If you are processing, storing, or transmitting CUI on that device, then yes, it needs to be a managed device as part of your compliance boundary. And that's really as simple as it gets. And the reason it is as simple is like, I can not think of any case where a mobile device would just be a security protection asset, for example, right? Like it's going to be a managed device one way or another, typically.
Right.
I guess there could be use cases of like a visitor management kiosk iPad, maybe where there wouldn't be CUI, but then that would probably be a CRMA. And anyways, long story short, if it has CUI, manage it. If it doesn't, you get to use your own discretion.
Let's see here. Somebody said, how many contracts will include level 2 self-assessment in phase 1? Okay.
Question mark.
Yeah. Well, here we go. So like we talked about earlier, bottom line, nobody knows. Nobody knows. Like we were talking about on the webinar, like we talked about on the podcast, we talked about multiple times, there is no DoD policy that says that the only level 2 status requirement during phase 1 can be self-assessment, right? A lot of people have interpreted the phased rollout to say there will only be level 2 self-assessment requirements in phase 1. That is not correct, right? We've done the deep dive into the existing policy. At best, it's a giant question mark, which means you can't bet on it only being self-assessment. And as we have said, if you bet on self-assessment and you need the C3PAO assessment, if they zig instead of zag, then you could be out of luck. The 48 CFR rule doesn't break down estimates based off of phases by year. They only give us rough percentages and rough numbers. But like we said, the DoD doesn't know. They've never known in previous rules. They don't know in these rules. There's various reasons for why that's true. So statistically, from the most recent rule, it's a very small percentage of the possible solicitations that are going to go out there. If you go into the 32 CFR final rule from December, they do estimates based off like total number of entities, total number of small entities that are impacted over the phase-in period. So in year 1 for small businesses, they think 20 people are going to get a requirement for a level 2 self-assessment, and 101 are going to get a level 2 self-assessment in year 2. 7 people who are other than small, so large businesses, would get a level 2 self-assessment in year 1 of the rollout. As you can probably tell, these are not real numbers. So they are required to put in estimates of impact, not just the DoD. Any agency that's going through rulemaking that's going to affect people has to estimate the impact on the estimated number of people or entities affected by the regulation. The problem is that there are other laws and regulations that prevent the government from getting the information to make accurate estimates. So we're sort of making them take a bunch of time to go through rulemaking. This is part of the reason why rulemaking takes so long, knowing that the estimates in the rules around impact are not accurate. So nobody knows the specific number. All of the estimates that come with a big grain of salt are very few companies are going to see level 2 self-assessment in phase 1. Unless you know the PM like dark green over there and you can send them cookies. Any thoughts?
That, yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's like, I just keep trying to wrap my head around, like, I have personally never owned a business outside of a very small vending machine company where CMMC does not apply. Maybe FCI, I don't know. We'll figure it out one day. But Scott, I look to you and try and understand the level of corporate risk that some of these organizations are willing to take on by assuming that the best case scenario will always play out for them, contract after contract after contract, especially when they're a sub versus a prime.
Yeah,
and what is it like? What makes it acceptable risk to assume that all contracts? Because again, if you get 5 contracts and 1 self-attest and the rest aren't, or 4 and 1, it doesn't matter the mix. Like, you got to do the thing. And so, anyways, I've always wondered, like, as a business owner, like, how are people justifying not assuming kind of worst case scenario when so much revenue is potentially on the line for them?
Yeah. I think that's really there. It's a in some cases it's an uninformed risk decision that many of them are making.
Yeah.
Many of the business owners don't really understand the level of risk that they're accepting. They're looking at cost. They're looking at the attention that it takes away from the rest of their core business to pursue this and get this done. They're looking at all of these other things and all these other priorities they have going on right now. And, it's not currently affecting them. Nothing is on fire today. And I've got other things that are on fire today that I have to take care of. Yeah. And that immediacy bias takes over, and you're taking, you're hitting the 50-meter targets, right?
Right.
But you're not seeing the 300-meter targets firing back. Right.
Yeah.
And
that's a problem for future me in 48 days. Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you've got limited time. You've got limited budget. You're trying to stay afloat and make payroll on Friday. Yeah. And it's just reality. Which is
100% valid. Right. Those are all true and real things that they have to worry about. But the irony is that worrying about the other things and putting it off is the reason why the program is coming, is because people were putting it off. Right. So
yeah, it is. That's exactly right. I mean, and it's going to end up, unfortunately, it's going to end up biting, some otherwise very good companies that are doing good work otherwise that just weren't protecting themselves. And it's going to end up hurting them.
Well, Joyce is reading ahead in school here. What sort of changes would an SMB expect when 171 Rev 2 moves to 171 Rev 3 for CMMC level 2? You have any big rocks, the sort of big changes off the top of your head here?
The biggest thing that I see that's going to be problematic is allow listing of applications only. So right now it's deny list or allow list or whitelist or blacklist with the nomenclature in Rev 2. But I really think the amount of change control and approval processes for allow listing applications, and only those apps can run on systems, is going to be a pain in the butt for small businesses, large businesses.
For
I mean, you
everybody.
name it. It's just going to be one of those things that is going to suck. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a great security practice,
Yeah.
but it's just going to not be easy to manage
Easy.
or maintain.
Yeah. So Jacob, I mean, you and Jason Sprosser, I believe, spent a tremendous amount of time breaking it down, right? You know, the R3 requirement set. If I remember right, it was 37% increase in requirements. Is that right?
Yeah. So in terms of the overall assessment objectives, I'd have to go back and look because it's crazy how long ago the final Rev 171 Rev 3 came out. But yeah, it's a significant jump in the number of assessment objectives that have to be accounted for during an assessment. But NIST did this goofy thing where they were like, well, we reduced the number of requirements, but they increased the number of assessment objectives. So you're like, that's some nonsense NIST math, right? As far as like, as we talked about, as far as like the actual changes in technical types of things that would require you to overhaul architecture or solutions or anything like that, there aren't very many. Obviously, application allow listing is a big deal, but a lot of it is, more on the assurance side. It's more of, what is your plan for supply chain risk management? I was kind of underwhelmed with the technical overhaul in terms of the requirements from 171 Rev 2 to Rev 3. So it's a lot more stuff to do. And yeah, well, maybe better luck next time when we go to 171 Rev 4 and we can work in some more controls around DNS, email, sandboxing, things like that. That would really, really help. I still think also CS5 is coming up. I'll be presenting on this topic. I still think that the way that they should be tailoring this baseline is based off of the MITRE ATT&CK framework for the most frequently mapped controls to actual APT activity, right? So, with CS5, I'll be talking about, you can go onto the MITRE ATT&CK framework and you can say, tell me what Iranian IPTs do in real life. And they'll say, these are all their tactics and techniques. And then they say, these are the controls that mitigate these real world tactics and techniques. Now, the irony is there's a ton of overlap already in 171 Rev 2, Rev 3, 853 moderate for those things. So we're already pretty close, but it would be nice if we used the full tailoring according to that activity. Maybe we'll do that in Rev 4. Well, I should say, maybe we'll do that in 53 Rev 6, and that can trickle down to 171 Rev 4. All right, Scott, here's one. Can a company that has a CMMC level 2 as a C3 PAO use that certification as a certified managed service provider?
So you mean CMMC L2 as a C3 You mean a DIBCAC assessment? Because the C3 PAOs go through a DIBCAC assessment. They don't get official CMMC L2s, right, Daniel, Jacob?
Yeah, so
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So they aren't getting an official CMMC L2 certification from another C3 PAO. They're getting a DIBCAC high assessment as a C3 PAO. But when you look at from a MSP standpoint, MSPs are not required to be certified, right? So, can they say that they're certified? They can say that they've met the requirements. If they haven't gone and gotten a C3 PAO to come in and do an assessment of their environment, they couldn't say that they are a CMMC L2 certification.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, this is the same reason why we have two CMMC certs, right? We have one as a contractor and one for service delivery, right?
Right.
So
right.
Your environment, your L2 environment that can handle CUI is not necessarily the same thing as your MSP service environment.
That's right. And
the contractor.
And the environment that company used to get the DIBCAC high with may be a different infrastructure than they're using to deliver managed services with, right? You could have an environment that goes through a DIBCAC high for a C3 PAO to be a C3 PAO, but that is not necessarily the delivery platform that is being used for their managed services customers. So it's kind of a, it depends, and it depends on what's been assessed and who it was assessed by. But again, MSPs are not required to be certified. I think it's a really good idea if MSPs are certified, which is why we're part of the MSP collective. And, we have a directory of all of the certified MSPs and MSSPs that are out there that, want to be listed. So we obviously think it's a really good idea, but again, not required.
Yeah. Also, the directory for MSP Collective is great because the MSPs on there were the ones that are saying, hey, we've shown people our shared responsibility matrix. Like, we'll tell everybody exactly what the nature of our services are so people can check it out. So the links are in there. Definitely check that out. I guess we'll wrap up here with Miss Joyce. She said, do you recommend that small businesses work towards 171 Rev 3 ahead of time? Just to, clarify, we're not expecting 32 CFR 170 CMMC program policy to be updated to point to 171 Rev 3 for 18 months, maybe at the fastest. 2 years, could be longer. We don't really know at this point, but it's going to be a while before you start to see that requirement flow down. But in the meantime, Daniel, Scott, do you guys recommend that people work on Rev 3 ahead of time?
1,000%, primarily because of your point earlier, the supply chain thing. I mean, you're going to need elements of that just for the flow down and control of the CMMC clause. Like, you need to start building out that team if you don't have one now,
right,
which maps to requirements in Rev 3. The application allow listing thing. You can easily you can start building a plan to implement that, and it's still in alignment with your Rev 2, right? So, I mean, I would say this and only this. Get your CMMC certification first. All eggs in the Rev 2 basket. Get it knocked out, do the thing, and then incrementally through change control, start working on Rev 3 implementation of the controls, and start building a hiring schedule, start figuring out how you're going to build out the teams, what partners you're going to use, MSPs, MSSPs to help offset some of these tool sets. Do they have to be FedRAMP in Rev 3 based on, are they processing CUI or not? Like all of those things. But I would only start that journey if Rev 2 and you have your CMMC cert in your possession.
Yeah, absolutely. All righty, everybody, that's an hour. It always flies by. If we didn't get to your question, we'll add it to the queue for our upcoming hotlines. We got a ton of questions that we still have to add to the queue from the webinar earlier this week. If you missed the webinar, you can register for that and for our 32 CFR webinar at the end of last year on our website at summit7.us. You can go on to CUIHotline.org and you can leave a message at the number for your question, which we always love playing on the air. You can fill out the form if you have questions, which is great if you have longer ones. If you find this afterwards, you can leave your question as a comment on YouTube or LinkedIn, and we'll be sure to see it. Whew, okay, so we are coming up on the phase 1 of the rollout here. So by the time we see you guys next Friday, we'll be less than 45 days away, and we'll go from there. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week.
See y'all.
Take care.